o'clock, and we're going to get started in just a minute. I'm talking about a variety of different topics. Last month, we talked about estate planning. This month, we'll be talking about long-term care. Coming up, we'll be doing proactive planning for the coming year and how to make 2022 a successful year. Additionally, we're going to be going to a tax planning seminar where we're going to be talking about a variety of different ways that we can help reduce your taxes, whether that's through charitable remainder trusts, deferred sales tax trusts, conservation easements, 1031 exchanges, opportunity zones. There's a variety of these particular strategies that we can employ, and we'll be having webinars on all of those as well. In February, I think, Luke, we're also going to have him speak on insurance needs, whole life and term life, first to die. Make sure that you have the right policy in place. But today we're going to be talking about long-term healthcare insurance. And I thought this was important because I listened to one of his, Luke's informational speeches and one of his webinars, and found some information in there that I had no idea that you could even do, like use an annuity that maybe wasn't very useful to you to help fund your long-term care planning. So I reached out to Luke. Luke and I have been collaborating on projects for about a couple of years now. So I've gotten to know him pretty well. At Cruise Asset Management, we're actually insurance licensed, but we don't sell insurance. We're just not an expert in that area. So we defer to the experts. Luke was one of them. I actually have my personal insurance through Luke, and have referred several clients to him. So really enjoyed working with him over the years. And so without further ado, we're going to talk about long-term healthcare planning. And again, amazing statistic that I saw was that roughly in the neighborhood of 2/3 of the people are going to need long-term care planning. And you just don't think it's going to be you, but that's where the statistics come from. And odds are it's going to be you. So let's talk to Luke about how he can help you with this strategy and some of the facts and figures that we can put to it. Because as you know, at Cruise Asset Management, we're quantitative. And so we like to make our choices by the numbers, and Luke is the same way. So Luke, take it away.
Thank you, Stuart. It's great to be here with you. And as always, it's a pleasure working with someone like you that cares so much about his clients and is such a great partner. As Stuart mentioned, we, in the same way, we have our niche, we have what we specialize in, and we refer all of our clients to Stuart and his team at Cruise Asset Management for their specialty, which is assets invested in the market and all that good stuff. So I appreciate you having me on here, Stuart.
All right.
So diving right in, talking about, the statistics and the odds. I'm going to pull up some stuff on my screen here in a second. It is interesting that when it comes to planning, there's a lot of things that we plan for and protect against and ensure that are a lot less likely to happen than this topic we're talking about today. You think about the likelihood of premature death before retirement, or something that's even 6 times more likely to happen, like disability prior to retirement. Long-term care statistically is even more likely to happen than either of those two things. And yet those other two things are far more common in planning practice than long-term care planning. This is the reason why it's referred to as the great retirement income gap, is because this is blind spot in planning. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my screen and share a few things.
And in the meantime, feel free to put in the chat any kind of questions that you might have. Luke, your host. So if you have any questions, I will field those while Luke is providing his expert information, and I will be the Vanna White of long-term care.
Sounds like a plan. All right. Let's get through the intro here. Can you see the screen okay, Stuart?
I can.
Up and live? Awesome.
Good.
Okay. Just a quick snapshot of who I am, who you're hearing from. So Vantage Insurance Solutions exists to bring financial literacy in our area of expertise. My personal passion is financial education. I got involved in this business about 18 years ago. And what brought me into it was financial education. Someone taught me a few little basic principles, and I just got excited. I got fired up, kind of like Stuart gets all geeky about the numbers. I get fired up when I hear empowering ideas and strategies that can improve my life and improve my family's life. And I actually got into this business just for my own sake. I wanted to learn some of these things. Then I figured I'd move on and get into a career of some kind. And And I ended up falling in love with educating other people about these strategies and how it can help them, and seeing the impact it's had. I've definitely found something that I love, and that's why I'm here. So 18 years later. So the Great Retirement Income Gap, that's this long-term care situation. The typical disclosures, again, we're not talking about guarantees, or everything we're talking about is hypothetical, all that good stuff. And of course, we need to talk one-on-one when it comes to your unique situation as to what is actually suitable. So please keep some of those things in mind. So just to frame up the discussion, we like to view it as these two phases in a way of retirement planning. You have this climb up the mountain, so to speak, the accumulation phase. Then you have this descent, the distribution phase, the retirement years. And so during this distribution phase is where we kind of get hit with this blind spot in planning sometimes, or these issues. And it's one of those things where a lot of people may be tempted to think, oh, my health insurance will cover this, or my Medicare, or whatever it might be. But this is not covered by those typical insurances. Long-term care expenses is not covered by health insurance. It has to be covered elsewhere. And to qualify for some sort of government plan that's different than Medicare, I know in California we call it Medi-Cal. So it's something that sometimes varies a little bit by state as far as how it's called, but it's limited in its scope, and you have to be impoverished to take advantage of it. And that's not especially attractive for most people. We like to have choices and options. We like to protect not only our assets, but our family from all that can go on. And so this descent down the mountain, the biggest factors involved here are obviously having enough income, which is lifestyle. That's something Stuart and his team solve, and we solve collectively. Healthcare costs, which, typical health insurance is going to help us with. But then there's long-term care costs. That's the thing that can really, really eat through your assets quickly and disrupt family and lifestyle. So what is long-term care? I want to just define what triggers long-term care, what differentiates it between just the typical situation I would go to the hospital for, a routine illness or injury. Long-term care is something that's chronic. Long-term care is when you lose to either two, what they call ADLs, activities of daily living, or have some form of mental illness, which poses a risk to yourself or to others. And so you can see here on the screen, this is the eating, bathing, dressing, all of those kinds of things. Any of these six, if you lose any two of these six, that's what would technically cause you to be diagnosed as needing long-term care. This is also what triggers benefits in these various programs that are available. And then mental illness being the alternative there, where you could be very well in body for a very long time, but because of mental illness, need assisted living. So those are kind of the simple definitions. It's an ongoing, chronic, or permanent situation. And that's where you transition out of what would normally be covered by health insurance into where either you're spending your assets for this, and we're going to look at the costs, or you have a way to transfer this risk to an insurance company in some manner. Here's some of the averages of cost for care as of 2017. And these numbers, of course, are going up at a greater rate than inflation typically. So you're looking at about $97,000 per year for a private room. And with inflation over the years, in 10 years, it's estimated to be about $137,000 a year, almost $200,000 in 20 years. And this is for national average. In California, the average cost per care for a private room is more like $127,000. And once it gets to more skilled nursing, it just kind of goes up from there. Now, if you need just basic in-home care, those numbers are less. In California, it's about $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year roughly. The national average is less than that. It's around $42,000 to $45,000 for just kind of basic in-home part-time assisted care type of stuff. But those are the typical numbers.
So Luke, I've got a question that's live, and it might be a good time to talk about this if we have that other screen up.
Sure.
The question was, what level of wealth do you believe is self-funding, meaning under a certain asset level, everyone should need long-term care insurance? So just like looking at this math, let's look at $200,000 a year. Now, Sure. Clearly, if somebody says, hey, it costs me $200,000 a year, I'm only projecting to live 10 years. If I have more than $2 million, maybe I can self-fund and be a little bit like my father, who wants to spend every single penny he has to
Right.
not make sure I get any inheritance. If that's his goal, which he has stated it is, that might be a good strategy. But the question is there a level of self-funding? And then obviously this can get super costly. So I guess the answer could be, depends on how much you want to leave behind or how much you want to spend, right? But is there a way you think about this in a different way?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And as we go through the different types of insurance and asset-based plans, I think it'll also help clarify this answer. But certainly you could, if you have the assets, you could reach a level of wealth where you could self-fund. But the question isn't so much can you. The other question you might want to ask yourself is does it make sense to? And is it just simply good math to transfer that risk to someone else? Give you a good example is a client I recently worked with out in the Beverly Hills area. He's an optometrist, an eye doctor. He's worth about $15 million, makes $500,000 a year. Can he afford long-term care? Absolutely, no question. Can he self-fund? Sure he can. But to give you one example without getting too far ahead of myself, there are programs where he can roll maybe a one-time lump sum of say 200,000 out of his portfolio into a plan that will ultimately pay out somewhere in the neighborhood of 500,000 to 600,000 for care, and not just in income for care, but tax-free income for care. And so that's just good math. He goes, well, yeah, I could plan to spend upwards of $500,000 on care for myself and my wife, or I could earmark 200,000 of it now that will at least triple in its value for care. But if the good news is if I don't need care and I just, pass away, car accident, who knows what might happen, something of equivalent value will be paid out in a death benefit to my heirs. So one way or another, it's not a use it or lose it. It's an asset to my estate, and it's just good math.
That's super good to know.
So
Does long-term care, and I don't know the answer to this, does long-term care cover some sort of like catastrophic illness? Like, I don't know. There are plenty of things where it just literally costs millions of dollars to take care of it. And, or is that?
It all depends on how it gets diagnosed. If it's an acute situation where it's like a terminal illness, they're going to die in less than 12 months or something like that, that typically isn't treated as long-term care. That might go right into more of a hospice situation, which if it does get classified as hospice, there are benefits there for under long-term care. But health insurance would typically cover a lot of those really extreme or acute critical situations. It isn't really until you kind of step over into, hey, this is kind of your chronic situation, and you might live another 2, 3, 5, 6 years needing assistance. But there's not really any recovery from this in sight, and it's probably going to ultimately be your demise. Major critical things, there are some other types of products that deal with the critical as opposed to chronic. In insurance, they differentiate between critical and chronic. It could be life-threatening and critical, but not necessarily be chronic. So, we'd have to kind of define specific cases, but those are typically two different types of insurable situations.
Excellent.
Make sense? Cool. All right. Anything else that we want to touch on this one? Perfect. All right. So what are some of the things that are impacting long-term care costs? For a few things. One of the things that I often get, when talking with people about planning for long-term care, a lot of times their initial reaction is, oh, my kids will take care of me, right? I don't know if you ever hear that, Stuart, and talking, oh, my kids will do it, or I'll just take care of my parents. And sometimes I have to be a little blunt with them and say, so what you're saying is you're fine with your daughter changing your diapers. Most people, when they go, maybe not. Maybe I'd like to preserve my dignity a little bit more than that. Maybe I'd just rather have her over to play a game of chess and enjoy some time together in those final years. Because I think if we're real honest with ourselves, I don't think any of us would wish that on anyone we cared about. We'd much rather preserve the relationship in the family. And chances are your kids have a career of their own. They have kids of their own. They have all these things. And it's created a whole nother epidemic of a financial situation. We have this generation, I'm sure you heard the term, the sandwich generation, right, sir? It's the people who are taking care of their kids and their parents at the same time. And it's brutal. It's utterly devastating them. And sometimes these people giving the care pass away before the ones they're caring for do, because it is so detrimental in their health. So it's a tragic situation. But because we're in a time in history now where higher and higher demand, more and more people needing care than really was anticipated. So we're seeing costs of care go up. We're seeing more and more people entering that stage of life unprepared or underfunded. People are living much longer, obviously these days, than when these plans were originally put in place. And the government programs have come sorely short. I was just talking with some of our public sector employees, people in the educational community, who have a program through what's called CalSTRS. It's basically public benefits like the public pensions and also insurance benefits. Through CalSTRS in California, educators and public employees have access to discounted long-term care insurance, for one. And at a recent seminar I gave, several of them came up to me who were at the seminar and said, "Hey, we're all having this same problem. They're decreasing our benefits. They're cutting some of the riders and bonuses that used to be on there, and our premiums have doubled over the last couple of years, ever since we retired. What can we do?" And so that's the problem a lot of people are facing. And so the good news is there's answers, there's solutions, but those are all the factors coming into play right now in that environment. And so we're having to rethink solutions for that issue and that problem. When it comes to Alzheimer's in particular, about 1 in every 10 people over age 65 will develop some form of dementia and Alzheimer's. It's a huge number. It's highly likely, unfortunately. And the longer we're living, the more that statistic increases. And again, it's financially devastating. About 1 every 33 seconds. Average time for care. Most recent numbers I looked at were for men approaching more like 3 years, just under 3 years. For women, just under 4. And Alzheimer's is actually approaching 10 now. So these numbers are creeping up. And so depending on the state you live in, the average cost for care can vary. We have a database where we can pull the cost for care in your particular state. And that's what we usually will check, depending where you're living or where you maybe plan to retire. So some people, maybe they're living in Illinois or Indiana or Texas or California, but they're going to retire somewhere else in Florida. We can calculate what the costs for care are there and where they're projected to be and build a plan around that outcome. So if you need care for 3 to 4 years, as you can see, that can take a pretty significant bite out of your portfolio. And again, there's ways to plan for that.
I know my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and she was in a facility for well over a decade. And my grandfather, her husband, had Parkinson's, was also in the facility for well over a decade simultaneously. And if you're going to rely on the government, they basically had to spend all of their assets down to zero. And then the government put them in whatever facility that they, deemed available to them, as opposed to, something that was kind of more appropriate or that they would have wanted to be had they planned ahead of time.
Right. Well, I think that's, to me, one of the biggest benefits of planning ahead and having at least some sort of plan, whether it's one of these 4 types of programs we're going to talk about today, or even earmarking assets, just having choices. Even if you do think that the idea of impoverishing yourself and then going on the government program is a good idea, that's certainly one strategy. Like you said, your choices now go from here to here. They decide where you get to go. And many of those facilities have not so good reputations. They're not some place you'd really want to send your loved one. So we want choices. We certainly want better if we could. So aside from dementia, which we just talked about in particular, in general, just under 70% of Americans turning 65 are going to need care. Huge number. All long-term care is just another retirement expense that causes your need for income to increase. It's really an income problem. And so long-term care insurance and some of these plans are just a way to increase your income required to cover this expense. If you need 6 figures a year to enjoy the comfortable lifestyle that you've built for yourself, and suddenly you have a new expense that is also 6 figures a year, that turns the whole plan upside down, unless you have some way to manage for it. So we're going to quickly go through what I call the top 4 ways to plan for long-term care. We're going to touch on some of the products that are out there in the marketplace today. For a lot of people in their mind, they only have kind of one idea, and that's the old pure long-term care insurance. And we're going to talk about some of the pros and cons of that, more longer standing plan and why it's fallen out of favor. But there's a few options. You got many good choices today. And those choices don't only range pertaining to your financial goals, they also span the spectrum based on what you can qualify for. Because remember, this isn't something like an investment like what you do, Stuart, where if you want it, you can kind of just buy it if you're financially suitable. You also have to qualify for it. And if you're in bad health, that also limits your options. And so fortunately, there are some choices that span the spectrum of health conditions as well as financial goals. So we're going to kind of talk about really these 2 goals. Number 1, protecting your family. Number 2, protecting your assets. That's really the reason why. So here's the first number 1 strategy that most people employ. It's called the Ostrich Technique. And basically, it's by far the most popular. It's the easiest to do now. but it is also by far the most painful later and the most expensive. But this is what we're seeing in an epidemic level in our society right now. So many people entering that season of life unprepared. And it's turning their financial life and their family life upside down. So hopefully we can agree that that's not a legitimate strategy.
Definitely human nature to employ that strategy, not just ostrich nature.
Yeah, it is. So here's the real options. Here's the top four. Pure long-term care insurance, pure life insurance with more of a long-term care or chronic illness rider, the hybrid option, which is basically something that has a life insurance and sometimes an annuity chassis, so to speak, but 100% of its value and benefit can be applied towards life insurance or long-term care. And then the fourth being an annuity, which is typically geared towards, volatility protected accumulation or income generation, but it has a long-term care rider. And there's some reasons why that might be a suitable or better option when it comes to planning for care. So we'll go through these just real quickly, some of the key characteristics. All right, so pure long-term care insurance. This is the type of plan where it's kind of like your auto insurance, your homeowner's insurance, where, if nothing bad happens, it doesn't pay anything. Basically, it's there for protection. It's pure protection. It's typically how you can get the highest benefit per day or per year for your dollar, purely for long-term care. You have a range of what's called elimination periods or time deductibles, typically from 60 to 120 days. I've seen some, though, go up to almost a year, where essentially what that means is that first period of time is on you. It's out of pocket. So if you have a 90-day elimination period, the first 3 months, you have to pay out of pocket from the moment you're diagnosed, and then your benefits kick in. So that's what that elimination period does. And just like any other deductible, that's one of the ways you can manipulate the premium and the cost. The bigger the deductible, the lower the premium. The more risk you're willing to take on personally, and the less risk you're transferring to the insurance company, the more you can shrink those premiums, but ultimately maybe protect against the more catastrophic situation that lasts much longer. It's rated based on health and age and gender, like much of these types of insurances. And some of the pros are, well, it's simple and straightforward. It has its clear purpose, and you can get a bigger bang for your buck purely for that purpose and from just about any other standpoint. And it can be pretty affordable. But there are some cons. You're going to see here, if you don't end up needing care, it doesn't provide anything else for your family. It has no asset value. So it's kind of got the reputation of use it or lose it kind of a thing. You could be paying tens of thousands of dollars over the course of time towards this policy, only to pass away in your sleep or in some sort of accident or something, or just a very fast, rapidly moving disease that really never enters the chronic stage. In all those situations, you'll never tap into a dollar of benefit, and it's kind of wasted money. And in some ways, you kind of hope it's wasted money. Nobody really wants to go through this, but that's one of the downsides. It's a use it or lose it type of proposition. The other big concern that a lot of people are facing right now is this last one on the con side, which is the carrier reserves the right to increase premiums. Premiums are not guaranteed in pure long-term care insurance. And, for a while, that wasn't an issue. Really up through near the Great Recession or so, 2008 and 10, we didn't see a lot of increases. But it was right around that similar time period that a lot of things came to fruition. And we started seeing a lot of increases across the board, people saying 25, 30, 50% premium increases. And it tends to happen more for people who are in retirement. Once they hit that 60, 65-year-old age, it seems like a lot of the carriers have started going through their books of business and enacting increases and running and getting approval through the state to do that. Just like these folks that were at my seminar just a week ago, they came up to me and said, we've seen in the last 2 years, our premium has doubled. We've seen 100% increase in just the last couple of years. So that can be a bit of a risk. Now,
exact time where you can't afford it.
Yeah, right when you're on a fixed income in retirement, you've got your set plan, and now your premiums double. So that's one of those things where that's not especially attractive for a lot of people. And that's between those two cons, quite frankly, that's one of the main reasons pure long-term care insurance is pretty rarely chosen. Every now and then I'll get a client who that's what they want because for one reason or another, it's the most important thing on their mind. But by and large, it's almost very, very rarely sold because the other options on the market, as you'll see, are quite a bit more compelling. And they just, to me, make a lot more financial sense. All right, life insurance with a chronic illness rider. Now, this one is one that we're finding more and more common throughout the country. Most basic life insurance plans that are on the permanent side, whole life, universal life, IULs, VULs, most of them have some sort of built-in version of a chronic illness rider. The terminal illness rider was one of the first ones to come and kind of be a standard part of a policy, which basically says if you have less than 12 months to live, you can access your death benefit. You can accelerate it. It's called an accelerator. You can accelerate typically anywhere from 50 to 75% of that death benefit before you die. And you can use it, quite frankly, with no strings attached. Once you trigger that benefit, you can use it for whatever you need. And the heart behind it is help you pay for medical expenses, avoid being impoverished before you pass away, kind of a thing. And so the chronic illness rider has followed suit of the terminal illness rider. Now we're seeing that most permanent life insurance plans have at least some form of chronic illness rider on there where you can tap into maybe 25 to 50 to 70% on the high end of death benefit, for the long-term care purposes. And it's triggered by the same things: loss of 2 activities of daily living, or dementia, or some mental illness. And so this can be a nice way to just sort of multitask dollars. So there's some good reasons why this might be a perfectly suitable solution for some people. The downsides would be, well, you don't necessarily get as much care dollars for your dollar as like a pure plan would or a hybrid plan would, because its primary goal is typically life insurance protection and maybe perhaps asset accumulation, depending on how we structure it. And you also have to remember that if you do end up using it for long-term care, well, it's eating away your death benefit as well. So if that life insurance was earmarked for specific legacy or inheritance goals or tax goals or other things, if you're also leaning on it for long-term care, you could be, undermining another financial goal you have. And so that's where you want to be careful in your planning process if you're trying to multitask your dollars across too many facets of your financial plan. So those are some of the pros and cons of something like this. But at least at minimum, it's not a bad way to at least have some form of protection in place. So a lot of our clients that have some form of permanent plan at least have minimal protection built in as a fallback. Going on to the third option here, the hybrid life-based plan it allows 100% of the benefit to be paid either way. So if you have say a $400,000 death benefit or whatever it might be, if you need care, the whole death benefit will pay out for care, tax-free. It qualifies under the Pension Protection Act. It qualifies as something that can be received tax-free for the purposes of care once you've triggered those same triggers. One of the reasons that people love this is the entire benefit pays out either way. It also has very flexible funding. We're going to talk a little bit more about funding options for this particular product and a little bit more detail about this one in a moment. But it has some really great and flexible funding options, which people really like. It's a way to also ensure that you never run out of care dollars. One of the benefits of there's a couple carriers on the market today that have what they call a continuation of benefits rider, that even when you've burned through that initial death benefit and base benefit, it's going to keep on paying either for twice as long, which they call a doubler, or indefinitely. Meaning it truly never runs out. So in the cases of like dementia and mental illness, that in particular can be a huge benefit. Most standard long-term care plans don't last any longer than 5 or 6 years. That's as long as you can buy them for. So to be able to get a plan, if you have a family history of dementia, mental illness, and like you said, Stuart, with your family, you case in point, have family members that needed care for a good decade. Yep. None of the standard long-term care plans would ever last that long. They don't. They go up to about 6 years typically. And so this would be a way to get a plan in place that it will pay to the 10th year, the 12th year, the 15th year. As long as you need care, it will never run out. Now, there won't be any life insurance benefit left, clearly, by that point, but it will certainly bear a huge portion of the burden for the financial cost of it. So those are some of the benefits of the hybrid plan. And then lastly, and then this, I know I was having trouble with my slides earlier. The annuity one, for some reason, it wasn't showing up in this slide format. So I'll just talk real quickly about the annuity one. The fourth one is the annuity, and an annuity, without getting too deep into it, is really it's another way to accumulate money in a more of a volatility protected environment. Love them or hate them, annuities have their place if they're designed right and used right. They can be used for accumulation, but typically the purpose behind them is to create an income stream for retirement. And annuities have long-term care riders you can add on top of them. And basically the way they work is, let's say you have an annuity that's paying you, $40 grand a year. for income. And maybe it's a guaranteed income for life, or you have a guaranteed withdrawal benefit of some kind or something like that. With the LTC rider, what it'll do with most of these LTC riders, it'll double your income if you need care. And so, you're getting 40 grand a year, and then you trigger that need for care, and the carrier is now going to double your income. Now you're getting 80 grand a year. Now your money's going twice as far, and it'll pay out beyond the account value. It'll pay out a specified benefit amount, even if your account is zero. It'll keep on going until it's paid out that specified benefit. And so one of the reasons that the annuity program can make a lot of sense is going back to that qualification issue. Some people who have health challenges and have a hard time qualifying, this can be a very attractive option because it's a lot easier to qualify for. It's much easier to qualify for the annuity program because it doesn't multiply your benefits instantly nearly as much as some of the other insurance options, but it does still give you a magnified benefit on your dollars. So this can be a great fallback option and might fit depending on someone's goals. So that's the annuity plan. So those are the top four. And like I mentioned, it's really about income, not assets. Now I'm going to go into really quickly a little bit of a hypothetical example of some of the ways you can fund the hybrid plan in particular, to show some of the creative ways that you can solve this problem in a way that may make a lot of sense. But Stuart, before I do dive into that, was there any thoughts you wanted to chime in on or questions you think we should address?
There was a question about, is cancer a long-term care candidate? And let me take a stab at it. Given what I just heard from your presentation, it would be a candidate if you lost two of those 6 characteristics or
activities of daily living.
Activities of daily life. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. That's really it. It doesn't matter what causes that loss of the 2 activities of daily living. It could be a car accident. It could be you fell down your stairs. It could be an illness. Whatever causes it, it really doesn't matter. That's the trigger, is the 2 ADLs. Or
so if it were a fast-acting cancer, you would still have that period of time where you would have to basically pay for it. But then once that 30, 60, 90 days kicked in, then the long-term care would take over at that point.
Right. Yeah. The elimination period, I think you're referring to. Yeah. That time deductible would still, basically from the moment that you have the diagnosis, that's when the clock starts ticking. And then whatever your deductible period is, you're out of pocket until that period ends. But yeah, exactly. Let's look at this example of kind of a way to close that income gap. So taking like an example portfolio, you may have a blend, and Stuart is the expert obviously on this, on how your portfolio is designed is going to be, that's Stuart's realm. So that's where I lean very heavily on him, and we work collaboratively on what makes sense to how to invest your portfolio. But the idea behind it is, instead of waiting until you need to pay for care and then working your way through your assets and just pillaging it, you would be just beginning to liquidate it, whether it's in the market or in real estate or any other thing. Rather than do that in a reactionary way, what if you planned ahead and you carved out a piece of that pie for the purposes of protecting the rest of the pie? And that's kind of the idea behind the hybrid plan in particular, is you have the ability to do a one-time funding as opposed to ongoing premiums. You could do either one, but these particular products can be funded with either qualified money or non-qualified money, meaning this could be a rollover from part of your IRA or 401k. This could be just a non-qualified investment. It could be money just sitting in the bank account or CDs or whatever. And you could do one time, just move it from that bucket to this bucket, and now it's magnified for care, or potentially, if you chose the option, unlimited for care, and it helps protect the rest of the portfolio. For example, rolling over 209,000 provides an initial death benefit of 227, and then you have the 81,000, the lifetime benefit. Another quick side note here from a tax perspective is that any premium dollars towards pure long-term care insurance, or something like this unlimited rider or a doubling rider, all of those types of premium costs qualify under qualified medical expenses for tax purposes and can be deducted from taxable income. Now that might vary a little state by state, but on a federal level, there's a tax deduction to be had there as a portion of this premium and money you roll over. So that's something as well.
Can you use your health savings account to do that?
Yeah, yes, actually, you can use your HSA. And so what some people will do is they'll do a rollover for the base benefit, and then the lifetime benefit, you can actually carve that out and just pay it annually. And they'll kind of run money through their HSA and just pay an annual premium towards the unlimited benefit. And the tax benefit there is kind of attractive. So, and again, disclaimer, I'm not a tax advisor. I know enough to be dangerous, but always consult your tax person for your particular situation. But this does qualify.
My lawyer wife would be proud of that disclaimer. Good job.
Okay, thank you. So that's another side thing to note. So the idea is simply moving money from this bucket to this bucket, as opposed to giving it away purely for premium. And at the very least, if you pass away and not needing care, it's going to pay more than you put in for your family, tax-free, to your estate. And if you do need care, it could pay out $1 million. It could pay out a significantly greater sum if you need care. So this kind of breaks it down. You know, if you were to, for example, invest $209,000, you would need a 39% guaranteed rate of return to generate $81,000 for lifetime. Equating it to Stuart's realm, you would need an 89 or 39% rate of return.
No problem.
Easy, right? That's what he does in his sleep. So it has its place. It has its place in the planning process, really to protect the rest of the assets that you're growing and living off of. And then at the end of the day can ultimately be paid out. So that wraps up the main key points I wanted to talk about the 4 main products, some of the tax consequences and options there, funding options, tools that are available, and some of the stats. And so I'd like to open it up a little bit more for if there's any more Q&A or discussions.
Yeah, so there was a question that kind of, I guess, touches on that last part. Is there a good standard age or an optimal age where you should start planning for buying? I mean, obviously it's cheaper when you're younger because you have to qualify.
Right.
And then you maybe get the benefit of compounding returns over time. But when you typically see, let me rephrase it. When do you typically see people buy it, and when do you recommend people buy it?
Yeah. So I would say I typically see people buy it between their mid to late 60s and all the way up to about age 80. And, you know, it seems like most people are pushing 70. They're starting to think about RMDs. They're starting to realize their mortality. And that's when it really becomes top of mind. When should they buy it? I would say between 55 and 65. 60 to 65 kind of being the sweet spot. But you can get a plan all the way up to about age 80. Most of these programs we just talked about, assuming you're in decent health, you can qualify for, from an age perspective, up to about age 80. That's usually about where they cap it off. But speaking of ideals, right about when someone's entering that retirement phase, right around 60, 65 is a perfect time to either earmark assets, or maybe if you're in a season of life where it makes sense. I have some clients where in their 50s preparing for, they might do a 10 or 20 pay plan where they, do a more, rather than a one-time lump sum, they do temporary premium payments to fund the plan leading up to retirement. But I wouldn't normally recommend anything earlier than about age 50. Usually, sure, is it a risk? Is it possible? Yeah, but it's just so rare. Usually there's just higher financial priorities in that earlier season of life, funding your investments, your other insurances and other financial goals leading up to that phase. Usually it's not recommended prior to that age, but there might be exceptions to that rule, but that's a rule of thumb.
So if it were on your mind, I did get a question like, if you wanted to fund it earlier, but if you're on your mind, maybe you could do that with a life insurance policy with a long-term care rider. Is that an option then?
Well, see, yeah, and that brings up a good point, is that you have, many times with a well-designed plan, you might already have a little bit of long-term care benefit in that pre-retirement stage built into your life insurance plan. Like I said, most of my clients, that's what they have. But once they get closer to retirement, we start thinking about, income protection. We start thinking about legacy. We start thinking about all these other dynamics. And that's where having a more actual long-term care plan really makes sense. And that's where, while they've had a little bit of protection through the journey, that's where I would say, looking at in their 50s or 60s to get an actual long-term care plan that might be separate from the life insurance plan because they have different objectives. Might make a lot of sense and usually does. But having a little bit of, built-in protection pre-retirement in your life insurance plan, I think is typically plenty sufficient for that pre-retirement season of life.
When you were talking about, I think it was the hybrid plan, what you said was it pay out the death, I think is what you said, it pays out your benefit, whether it's long-term care or your death benefit, until that's exhausted. And then it would continue to pay, you said, up to twice as much or perhaps indefinitely. What would be the best strategy if somebody said, hey, I want to leave something to my heirs, I don't want that death benefit to be exhausted? What would be the best plan in that case?
Really, to have a separate life insurance plan.
Just a separate one.
Yeah, because I mean, even the hybrid plan, while it has a nice life insurance benefit, its primary function is long-term care. Okay. That's the primary reason you get it. Having a life insurance benefit on it is kind of secondary, and it's more like, well, that way at least I know my money's put to good use. If I end up dying without needing care, it hasn't been a waste of money, and that's nice to know. There's still typically a magnified benefit to my estate and my heirs. If I don't happen to use it for care, but it's really still as hard an intention is for care. And so if you're really wanting to leave some money to your heirs, or you have estate tax planning to do, other issues like that, having a real actual life insurance plan that's its primary function is the way to go. It's much better than trying to get $1 to do too many different jobs there. If you're trying to have it do both totally.
Fair enough. So what's the option? The annuity option is the only one to fund with the qualified money, or are there other ways to fund with retirement money?
Yeah, good question. So the hybrid plan has a kind of an interesting program for qualified money. So the annuity option is the primary one, but there's actually a hybrid option that has a built-in annuity that automatically transitions the qualified money into non-qualified, typically over a 20-year period. And so what it does is you dump over the qualified money, say $200,000, and it goes into a qualified annuity initially. And then over the course of 20 years, it transitions the money from the qualified to the non-qualified by paying basically a 20-pay premium life policy that's designed for long-term care over that 20 years. And at the end of the 20 years, that annuity has been completely transferred in value to the life insurance policy. You've got the cash value in the policy, you've got the death benefit and the ongoing benefits. And so one thing to keep in mind on that too is when you use qualified money initially, because that money's never been taxed, typically, assuming if it's qualified money, assuming it's traditional as opposed to a Roth, if it's never been taxed, that's one situation where those long-term care benefits might be taxable as income. If let's say you rolled it over and then immediately needed care the next year before money had been transitioned out, there could be tax consequences on the majority of those income payments for long-term care. But that's part of the nice thing about it is, people looking to transition money and kind of clear up that tax liability, putting it into a product like that automatically kind of stretches it out over a 20-year period and eases that tax liability over to the non-qualified side, in which case, once it's there, whatever amount of benefit is in that side of the column is tax-free and once it gets there. And so wherever you are in the journey when you happen to trigger care, it may be all there, maybe partially there, but that's how it would be treated. But yes, so it could be either annuity or the hybrid program, which is based essentially on an annuity. There's kind of two ways to take advantage of that funding strategy.
All right. Well, I don't have any more questions. I think that was super informative. So I appreciate your time, Luke. And we're going to have Luke on again in February to talk about difference of life insurance, whole life, term, first to die. Make sure you have the right policy in place. Talk about the differences. We have other experts on the calendar. We're going to be meeting with a high performance coach that's going to talk about, a lot of people are in retirement and then what do I do now? But, nobody really retires anymore. I'm starting to call it like phase 2 where, option B or now I get to do what I want kind of thing. So it's going to talk about some of those plans. And then John and I are going to talk about 2022 planning. We kind of feel like the future returns of the S&P are not going to continue the way that they have been going for the last decade. There's a lot of historical precedent about that. And so we'll have a webinar on that in January. And so we have a whole slew of other things, proactive tax planning that we're going to get to. Luke and I are going to go on a seminar in November and again, regurgitate enough that we're dangerous about, see if we can stir the pot a little bit in that.
Sure.
But, yeah. So we really appreciate your attending this webinar. If you want to get a hold of me, you can reach me at Stuart@cruiseassetmanagement.com and Luke at VantageInso.com. Is that right?
There you go.
Exactly. Or reach out to either one of us and we can get in touch with the other one if you need, if you have any questions offline. All right. So we really appreciate your time, Luke. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Stuart. It's been a pleasure.
It's Cruise Asset Management and Luke Advantage Insurance signing off.